I've followed Mark Dice, I would say now for about, 5 years or so, probably 2016, maybe late 2015 even. I found Mark Dice on YouTube. He was one of the first kind of, people use the word truther, right? The first kind of truther channel that I found around the same time I found Alex Jones and started watching him. And I still follow Mark Dice to this day because, I don't know, kind of a throwback to an earlier time in my beginning of learning to understand the world. And he was kind of a gateway just to open up my eyes to a lot more things. But one thing Mark Dice always talks about is feminism, right? And for years and years has always kind of made light of feminism and made fun of it and made fun of the characters behind it and all of that. But I want to talk about feminism from a personal perspective and a lot more, I guess, serious perspective. And the reason being is, as I always say, I think it's important. And I think the more I think about it and I think about my life and my history and people I know, I think feminism in and of itself is the most destructive physical force in society. And when I say feminism, I don't mean that women shouldn't have rights. I hope you understand that. I hope we're on at least that same wavelength. When I say feminism, feminism is really the belief that women are better than men, are much better than men, that men are stupid, moronic pigs that can't think for themselves and only ever want to have sex, basically. And I can say that because that's ever since I was a child in the 80s, that's how men have been presented in the media, as stupid, moronic idiots who can't figure out anything and are just like big babies walking around the world and need a woman to tell us what to do. It's always been that way in the media and television shows, commercials. Think about it. I remember watching commercials and stuff when I was a kid or, young adult or, teenager or whatever, and thinking, man, they're always making fun of me. Why are they always making me look like an idiot? Why is it always the woman that has the answers? And why is it always the man that's just a moron waiting for the woman? It's just, and it always bothered me. I never understood that it was an actual agenda to chop off the legs of man. And there's a reason that the enemy has been doing that for so long. It's because the man is the head of the relationship. As Christ is head of the church, so is the man the head of the woman. And we have a society now that is 100% upside down. Just as the enemy does with everything, inverts it, turns it around, turns it upside down. What's right is left, what's left is right, And that's what's happened through feminism. And if you've never looked into the ERA movement, Equal Rights Amendment, from back in the 70s, that really skyrocketed this feminism bullshit into the world as we see it now, people look back at ERA and they think, well, that was like a grassroots movement of real women that wanted to get out into the workforce. And I'm not saying that didn't exist. Of course, there were women that wanted to get out into the workforce. But why did they? Well, because they were being told that that's what they should want by the media. And if you look into who funded ERA now and the corporate interests that were involved in the entire thing, it was no different than BLM. It's not grassroots. It's funded from way up on high. And why would they do that? Well, they would do that because they want to invert society. put women in charge and castrate men. And it worked. It worked. They won that battle. It's over. My experience, man, I tell you, my whole life I've been crushed by feminism in every way, in every area of my life. This white male privilege, garbage, pisses me off almost more than anything I hear. When people start talking about white male privilege, because the reality is the exact opposite. And if there's another 44-year-old man with a big old beard that's 6'4" and 230 pounds out there like me, they'll tell you the same thing. We're working against the grain because we are the exact enemy of feminism. That's what women in feminism hate more than anything, is that type of man. It represents everything they despise. And so I spent my entire career, if you can call it that, I don't even barely call it a career, more like floundering around trying to figure out why everything was so messed up in the corporate world. But when I got out of school, I told you in one of yesterday's videos, I went to school for audio engineering, and that turned into kind of a side business for a long time, and then a hobby for a lifetime, making music and stuff like that. But right out of school, I went right into the corporate world, right into an insurance company in Lake Mary, Florida, owned by GE Capital. And whoa, was that depressing. And the first supervisor I had at that time, I was, I guess, 21 or 22, was a feminist. I didn't know it at the time. I know it now. And she hated me. She didn't hire me. It wasn't up to her. Somebody else had hired me, but she was my direct supervisor. And from the moment I walked in the room, my first day, I knew I had an enemy. She hated me. She would never talk to me with an ounce of respect. She talked to me like a dog. I'm an idea guy, and I always have been, and I always will be. Good luck getting any of those out in any meeting or anything like that when you're surrounded. And again, it wasn't just her. It was everybody I was working with, and then like the 2 or 3 men sprinkled in, right? That we tried to band together as best as we could and go to lunch every day and be like, how do we battle this? How do we battle this? I'm not even kidding you. This was my first job, my first corporate environment. And that lasted about a year. The company shut down, but you know, I can go through literally every job I've ever had, which you don't want me to do because it would be insanely boring. But every job has been the same. I had one job. I worked for the Dial Corporation, the soap company out of Scottsdale, and I had a direct supervisor the only time in my life that was a man. And wow, like, my job was so much easier. Meetings were 10% of the time that the meetings were sitting in rooms with a bunch of women feminists bickering, you know, and things just got done and everything flowed, and we didn't even need to communicate. We just, you know, everything worked with him. He was the best supervisor I've ever had by far. And he wasn't probably even that good. He wasn't a feminist, right? But it went from that to just, right, you know, when that job ended, I don't know, 2 or 3 years later. And then my last job in the corporate environment was in the magazine industry. And I changed industries in 2011. Kind of changed jobs, wanted a new start. I was working just a really boring corporate job, and so I wanted to get in the magazine industry, and the only way to do that was through sales, so, you know, selling advertising. So I started out selling advertising and did really well at that, although I hated it with a passion. I never want to sell again. It's horrible. But I had goals of things I wanted to do there, and I worked my way up. Social media manager, eventually editor, or assistant editor, then editor, and then eventually publisher. And I was publisher of 2 very major magazines for gosh, what, 4 years, I guess. And I worked my way through in that company because I just kind of stayed under the radar and kept my head down and did my job really well. And my direct supervisor was a feminist, but the owner of the company recognized me for what I was doing. And so he just preempted all that nonsense that was going on. So what ended up happening is I ended up, as publisher of 2 huge magazines, I had a bunch of people under me. And guess what? They all were almost feminists. And I didn't hire them. They were already there when I was installed in this position. And so then I had feminists under me, plotting against me in every way and wanting to turn my magazines into women's magazines. And this was even back in like 2014. They were just pushing me constantly. Women of color, women of color, women of color. We have to have all women of color in these magazines. And I'm like, these magazines are being distributed to rural America, mostly white readers by far, and about 50-50 split men and women, because I tailored them so that they would appeal to men and women. It was perfect. It was 50-50 split. No, they didn't want that. They want 100% nonsense. And so just constant sabotage and sabotage. And then a new controller of the company came in, which was over me. A controller is over a publisher. And guess what she was? A raging feminist. And she made my life hell. And she immediately cut my pay by $20,000 a year. And I wasn't making that much to begin with. That was a major cut. Gave me more responsibility, which was impossible to do. And then removed staff from me. So then she just set me there like a sitting duck. Like, okay, are you going to work 20 hours a day or are you going to fail? And after, 15, 20 years of dealing with all of this, I had enough. I quit. I wouldn't do it anymore. And of course, they've run those magazines into the ground since then. No distribution left because they turned them into a feminist propaganda. What do you call it? Feminist propaganda garbage. Nobody reads. Nobody reads this stuff. I don't think real women are not feminists. Real women hate feminists because real women understand what feminism has done to the family and done to men, and then by default done to them. And I saw a post on Twitter earlier today, and it was interesting because I understood where she's coming from, but I don't think she understood necessarily where I'm coming from. And she said, being a young woman in the workforce is just getting bullied by all the other childless feminists up the hierarchy. Let me read that again. Being a young woman in the workforce is just getting bullied by all the older childless feminists up the hierarchy. I agree with her. This is a woman that's not a feminist. She's a real woman. And she's being bullied by the feminists. So the feminists are not about women or men. They're about feminism. And if you don't go along the lines of their feminist agenda, in other words, destroy men, then you're not with them, even if you're a woman. So I understand, clearly, she's being bullied. But I felt the need, and it got me thinking about this whole thing and my whole career and everything I've lived through. And I replied to her and I said, now imagine being a middle-aged white man in that same environment. That's why I left the corporate environment 6 years ago. Everything was run by feminists and I was the enemy. And she didn't reply to that. A bunch of other people did, including, and I found this interesting, a married couple that replied. And the man, I can't find it now, but the man replied and said basically, without me even telling him my experiences at all, he basically, in one reply, laid out my exact experience for my whole career with feminism in the corporate environment and how it's taken everything over and destroyed our way of life. You know, it's not the problem. What happened, I think, and women, you guys, you have a idealistic thought of what marriage and family should look like. And here's what I think society did to create that. They gave us the 50s and 60s, right? And in the 50s and 60s, it made it look like families were all happy, and it was the man and the woman and 2 or 3 children and a dog, and only the man worked, and the woman stayed home and cooked supper and cleaned the house and did all those things. And that made us think, oh, those are the good old days. That was how it always used to be. Always, I don't believe that for a second. That was propaganda too. But it planted in our minds this idealistic thing that could be achieved when really it was only ever on TV. Even go back to like the 1800s, and I have this like disagreement with my mom all the time, because she always says, I wish we could just go back and live like they did on Little House on the Prairie, the old show Little House on the Prairie with Michael Landon. And I'm like, Mom, that was a show. That's not what it was like at all. What it was like really back then, and I've studied all of this. If you've never seen, Ken Burns has a documentary series on, oh geez, major brain fart right now. What is it called when they stop selling alcohol? Holy cow, Travis. I literally can't think of it. Prohibition. Jeez. He has I think it's a 3-part series on Prohibition that he made, I don't know when he made it. I think in the 90s, but I just saw it a few years ago. And it's fascinating. It shows what really life was like in the 1800s and what really led to Prohibition. And Little House on the Prairie was not life in the 1800s. Men were drunk all the time. Life was really hard. Alcohol was always the coping mechanism. And what happened with Prohibition, with this Ken Burns series, if I highly recommend it. I think it was on Netflix a few years ago. I don't know if it's still on there, but in the documentary, it talks about how in the 1800s, with drinking, it was all beer. It was beer mostly that men drank, and cider, hard cider and things like that. And they drank all day, every day while they're working and everything else. It was just a way of life, it's how they lived. But it was fine. Like, they got by. It was beer. It was, and then distilleries started with whiskey and hard alcohol, spirits. There's a reason they call them spirits. Beer and wine aren't called spirits, but hard alcohol are called spirits. Because in my experience, spirits are definitely spirits. But, and so men began to swap out beer for whiskey and drinking the same quantities as they were beer. Now all day they were drinking whiskey or hard alcohol. And it destroyed society in the 1800s and as we went into the 1900s. And so women back then were like, what are we going to do with our men? They didn't want to take over power or control. They just wanted their men back because their men had been taken away by alcohol completely. And they would, man, I can't believe how much I remember about these documentaries. It was so long ago, but men would get their paychecks and go straight to the saloon or tavern or whatever and spend it all on booze and gambling and come home broke with no food. And it was life. And so women said, we want our men back. And so they kind of came up with the whole idea of prohibition. They didn't come up with the idea of prohibition, but they just wanted to stop men from drinking. And so they started this whole movement, and it's really fascinating. So I recommend watching it, because really I think that was a foreshadowing with prohibition and what women did to push for that in the 1800s and early 1900s. And it took years from the time they started pushing for it until it actually happened. Years and years. I think it was over a decade, maybe more. But it was a foreshadowing of feminism. But this time in the 70s, it was different. And women were saying, we don't want our men back. We want control. And they sold it to us as equal rights. And really it meant, we want control. And it worked. You got it. You won. You guys won. White flag, right? You beat us. Where did that get you? Where did that get you? Is what I want to know. Because you lost your men. And you need us. You're going to need us a lot. Very, very soon. You are going to need your strong men. If there's one feminist listening to this just to mock me or spite me, you're going to need us. And deep down, you know that. You do. I encourage real women. Man, I could tell you. I just almost started crying right now with what I just thought, because, you know, the relationship that I recently came out of, it was the same thing. She's not a feminist at all. She's a traditional woman, and she wants a traditional relationship and structure, but our relationship was completely upside down from day one. She made 4 times the amount of money that I've ever made. Okay. You know, and so she had financial control of the home in every way. And when you have that, you have full decision-making power on how money is spent and things like that, you know, major decisions. And so in our relationship, man, I talk about castrated. Like, I couldn't make decisions about anything, or at least I couldn't figure out how to navigate all that because it was so upside down. I really tried to. And all I ever wanted in any relationship, deep down, all I ever wanted was to be the leader, to make the decision. Let me screw up. Let me learn. Or let me make a really good decision that you may have never made. And that was what I always struggled with. I was always saying, please, just trust me. You know, I might sound crazy right now about this, that, or the other, or you may see it a very different way than I do, but trust me. And so many times, although we'd see two things completely in a different way, ultimately the end result would end up being the same. We were just approaching it differently, but it was always this kind of situation where we were just backwards, and just like the rest of the world. And it doesn't last long term. We did it for 7 years, tried so hard, broke up so many times, kept trying again, not wanting to start over, wanting to figure it out. And ultimately, I got to tell you, and she would agree with this, I think, at least on a small level, that a major problem is feminism. And it never had anything to do with our relationship. It had everything to do with everything that happened when we were born back in the 70s. It's not, you know, and somebody can easily sit there and say, well, you're just making excuses. You're making excuses for not having success in life. Well, I've had success. I've had my own success. It's not an excuse. I don't care about money. I've never cared about money. I don't care if I make $10,000 a year or $150,000 a year. It's meaningless to me. I just want to be comfortable, you know. So it's not making an excuse for lack of success. It's a fact that feminism has ruined this world and turned it completely upside down. And I know it's hard. I feel like I want to talk to the women right now, because us men, we're pretty confused. I'll tell you, we are. We're pretty confused for the most part. Maybe not all of us, but I know a lot of us are, on the role that we play, or that we're quote unquote allowed to play. Because even though you may not be a feminist, I know that those thoughts and ideas creep into your mind when arguments happen, and you get that same attitude that the feminists have because it's been so drilled into you. Even though it's not what you believe, it's become kind of a part of your consciousness. It's just how it works. We have, us men, we have the same things like that. You know, I think of countless times in relationship discussions or arguments where I say things where I'm like, that's nothing that I actually think or believe. That's just something that's been indoctrinated in me. But now it came out of my face and it sounds like I believe it, you know? Like, we're not going to get through this if we're working against each other as men and women. We're just not. And that's why, you know, they talk so much about how they've tried to divide us racially. But really, the real battle always started with men and women, because men and women can procreate and make more of us. And the more of us that there are, the more threatened those in power are, number one. But number two, they know they can destroy society by inverting it. Give your men a chance. Just with one thing. One thing that you think you can't trust him with. One thing that he's been trying to tell you, you can trust me with this one thing. And you don't want to let control over that one thing. Just telling you, this could be an interesting exercise, if I'm making any sense at all. But just let him do it. Let him screw it up. Don't coach. Don't give ideas. Don't anything. Let him figure out whatever that thing is on his own. Because that's what we as men need. We need that. We need to figure things out on our own, solve problems, and we do it for you. Ultimately, I remember this is, you know, whatever. I've been so raw in my life lately, and I don't really care about offending anybody anymore. And I was towards the end of my relationship. I remember having a conversation with her, and I said, and this is, at least for me, and I think most men would agree, this is true. I said to her, you know, hon, what you don't understand is that everything men do, everything we do, boils down to one thing. Will this help me have a chance to have sex tonight? And it's true. And so and doctors will tell you the same thing. Why did you become a doctor? Sex. Money, obviously, but sex, number one. Women. I mean, that's how we're wired. That's how we think. We love women, right? And we'll do anything. We'll do anything to make you happy, as long as that reward is at the end of the rainbow. And it's funny, but it's not, because it's important. It's important to have that. It's important to let a man do the things he wants to do for you throughout the course of a day or whatever, to make you happy, so that you then by default want to make him happy. And that's what he's hoping the whole time. If I make her happy, she'll make me happy. And look at what we could do. We could have this whole circle of happy. At least that's how I look at it. I don't know. It just seems so simple. But instead, like as men and women, we just bash heads all the time because of opinion or whatever, or just stubbornness or control. But we're a team. We're a team. We are, us men and women. And if we really figure out how to flow between each other without the constant that happens. Like sometimes I was trying to learn this at the end of my relationship, and I didn't get there. I was trying. I was at least aware of what I was doing. And I realized at a certain point, no matter how right I know I am about something, even if I'm dead set 100%, no doubt in my mind, and you're disagreeing with me, and you believe just as much that you're right, and I'll fight that till the death because I know I'm right. And I realize, you know what, who cares on whatever that point is, unless it's a life or death situation. But whatever that point is might seem important at the time, but I was trying to just let those things go. Like, it's not worth arguing over. It doesn't even matter if we disagree on this one thing. I'd rather get along and go to bed with you tonight and fall asleep with you, you know? And so I think becoming aware of like why we're fighting and why we're disagreeing and what's triggering all of that. I hate that word triggering because it's so abused. But what's triggering all of that, and then just be like, you know what? It's not worth it. Let's just share our lives, and let's just enjoy the fact that we have each other, and so many other people out there don't. But that's what feminism wants to destroy. Feminism wants you against me, and you against it, but mostly you against me. And it's a very, very small percentage of the population. They just have a really, really loud voice. If you're a man and you've had similar experiences throughout your working career or things like that, I'd love to hear from you, and you know, tell me about what you've been through and how you've combated it. For me personally, I turned into a freelancer, and I've just been off the corporate everything for 6 years, and I could never imagine going back. I would never go back, and now especially with COVID, I mean, there's no chance in hell I would go back. Sit in an office with a mask on or something. These people are crazy that do that. I was living next to a courthouse before I moved out, and man, I just watched these people that work in this courthouse come out of work every day at 4:30, still wearing their masks that they've been wearing all day in that office, in that dreadful environment. And I just think, man, there's nothing in this world that would make me do that ever again. What a depressing existence, right? Let's get this back together. We can do this. We can do this. Let's just stop paying attention to these puke scum that are just trying to ruin us. And let's maybe look at each other again. Like, when's the last time you looked in your husband's eyes or your wife's eyes? Look at each other again. Let's see if we can find each other again and get rid of this mess, and move forward in a way that that we can't imagine. God bless you guys. We'll speak soon. Peace.